Okay, take it away, Sally.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's so good to see you. As we said just a minute ago, it's like old home week. So many of our faithful have come back today to celebrate Halloween with us and take a journey for who knows where. Anyway, we have a very busy program for you. Some wonderful people have volunteered to tell stories, and we welcome you and love you, and let's get on with the show.
Okay. Everybody mute who is not a teller.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to introduce the tellers tonight. And I just put in the chat our list of tellers and the order that we expect them to be in. Oh, it says tentatively, but this is the order. And we will start. We're starting tonight with Bobby Kincaid, who used to be the co-host of this swap. And so, and then in more recent years, she hasn't always been able to join us. So it's just, but recently she has, and we've been delighting in her stories. So Bobby, get us started.
Oh, it's an honor to be first. I've never been first. Thank you. Anyway, it's called Never Mind Those Watermelons, and it's an Alabama tale. And his name that tells him does Spooky Tales of the South. And I'm going to spell it because I'll slaughter it. SCHLOOSSER. He was on the net, and I discovered him on the net. I told this with Liz, and Karen, we had a group, and Nancy, I think. I can't remember. Sorry, it went another place. Spooky Tales in the Redwoods up at the Botanical Gardens. It's short and sweet, I hope. All right. One day, old Sam Gibbs was at the market, the grocers, and he was listening to a couple of friends talking about the goblin that lived up in old Frank's gold cabin where he searched for gold. And he listened, and one says he saw the goblin on the porch, and the other one said he saw her looking out the window. Another one said he saw her sitting inside on the old chair. Oh, Sam Gibbs said, "Oh, that's not possible. There aren't any ghosts or goblins." Well, Hank, the grocer, was listening to this, and he came over and he said, "I'll make a wager with you, old Sam, that you can't spend the night there." And Sam laughed and laughed. He said, "Oh, okay, I'll do it. I'll take those watermelon." And the other three said, "We'll help pay for it." So Sam went home and he got his matches and he got his bedroll and he got a sandwich, a chicken sandwich with some potato salad. And he got a book, and he chose a book, Goblins, Ghosts, Ghouls, and Witches, because he wanted to be scared, but he knew there was no, really goblin. So he walked by the grocers and he waved, and everybody waved to him. And they were going to wait to see how long it took, of course. So he walked up the trail and he got to the cabin, and he opened the rickety old door and he looked at it. It was dusty. The chair was still there. The table was still there. And the fireplace was. So he chucked some wood in the fireplace, lit it, sat in the creaky old chair, put his lunch out, put his knife and fork out, and he leaned back in the chair and he started reading his book. Well, there was the old goblin. Her name was old Katie. Old Katie loved visitors. Actually, she was the caretaker of the place. And some she liked and some she didn't. Well, she saw he had some dinner spread out. So she sat down at the table and she got his fork and his knife and she put it on the table. Well, Sam Gibb looked up, and he saw the most horrible thing sitting across from him. Green eyes, long nose, long ears, scrubby hair, terrible clothing, an awful smell. And she had a little beard. And she looked at Sam gives, and she said, "Your dinner." And he got up from his chair, it fell backwards, and he ran out the door, tripping a bit, got himself centered, and started running. Well, the goblin was right after him, and she said, "Sam, give your dinner." Well, he ran so fast, he passed a raccoon chasing a rabbit. He passed the coyotes howling, and she got up with him and she said, "But Sam, give your dinner." And he was so horrified, he ran faster. He got to the village and she said, "No, I'm not going to go there." And he ran past the market, the grocers. He said, "Don't worry about those watermelons." And he went home and he slammed the door, he pulled the curtains, and he crawled into the bed. And he stayed there a couple of days. Now, for the goblin, she walked back home to her little cabin, and she sat down and she had his dinner, and she loved his bedroll. She's still sleeping in the bedroll probably, and she's still waiting for another visitor to come. May you all visit Frank's golden cabin where he lives. All right. Thank you.
Bravo.
Uh,
Hmm.
Thank you, Bobby. You got us off to a great start.
yeah, thank you.
Goblins. All right. Oh, Bobby, do put in the chat, and this is all the storytellers we've invited them to put in the chat anything that they have coming up that they'd like you to know about. So do open your chat, and it's also a chance for you to tell the storytellers what you liked about their stories. Okay. Well, now I'm going to introduce our featured teller, Tim Araneta. And if you are a regular to this swap and you've been coming for a while, you know that we've had Tim Araneta as our featured storyteller many, many, many times. And we're so happy to have him back. I just have to say, I first got to know you, Tim, when we were both board members of SAC, of the Storytelling Association of California, which is our Zoom host and supporting all these swaps. And that was like 25 years ago, I think. And, but Tim is ever young. I can't say that for the rest of us, but in between now and then, Tim has done so many things. As his website says, that at theaters and festivals, backyard concerts, virtual rooms in the Bay Area, in California, across the country, he brings fairy tales and folk tales to all kinds of audiences, especially adult audiences who don't always think that they want to hear fairy tales and folk tales. In fact, he recently won the Pittsburgh Storytelling Series inaugural folktale fight. And I really want to know what a folktale fight is, but whatever it is, I'm not surprised you won. Tim was a fringe festival performer before I'd ever knew what a fringe festival was. So he is like out there pushing the boundaries of where and to whom fairy tales and folk tales get told. But tonight, he's I feel like he's coming home to us. So welcome home, Tim.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight to tell some stories. There was once an orphan girl who was taken in by a woman who had her own daughter. And her new foster mother did not treat her well. Although she was kind and perfectly nice and spoiled her own daughter, the orphan found herself doing all the chores, doing all the work. And one night, after a hard day scrubbing, as she sat down to eat dinner with her foster mother and foster sister, the mother looked at her and said, "You are filthy. Go, get off from the table. Go down to the bathhouse. Get yourself clean before you have any dinner." Well, off the orphan went down to the bathhouse, and she went inside, and though she was hungry, she cleaned herself quickly. And after she dried herself off, she saw next to the bath a little mouse. And the mouse looked at her and said, "Can you spare a crumb? I've not eaten in 3 days." And though the girl had not eaten dinner herself, nevertheless in her pocket she had a dry crust of bread, and and she gave it to the mouse. As she was preparing to leave the bathhouse, there was a great clattering of many horses and bells outside, and as she opened the door to go home, she saw, drawing up to the bathhouse, a sleek black coach being pulled by 6 black horses with fine golden ornaments on them. And they pulled to a stop right in front of the bathhouse. And the orphan girl thought there must be some rich lord coming to take a bath. And when the coach finally stopped and the door opened, who should step down out of the coach but the devil himself, followed by 3 little devils and an old devil who must have been, judging by the way he deferred to her, the devil's own mother. Well, the orphan girl was petrified, scared. She crossed herself and ducked back into the bathhouse and closed the door. Now, said the devil, you must come out and come with me, for I have decided that you shall be the bride for one of my sons. Well, the orphan girl didn't know what to do, but the mouse said to her, fear not, you can get through this as long as you delay. Don't get into that coach until the sun rises. Once the sun comes up, he'll have no power here. Well, how am I to delay? Well, just say you're not ready to go. And so the orphan girl said, I'm not ready to be married. I have no fine shoes. I have no fine dress. And the devil said, that won't be a problem. And the devil's own mother said, now, grandsons, this is how we will decide which of you gets married this evening. And she turned to the oldest grandson devil. How fast are you? How fast could you get a wedding dress for your bride? I can travel as fast as a wave on the ocean. And to the second grandson, how fast can you travel? I can travel as fast as the wind that pushes the wave. And to the youngest grandson, and how fast can you get a wedding dress? I can travel as fast as thought. I'll be here and there and back again in no time at all. Well, then go, quick as thought, get a wedding dress for your new bride. And he was gone. He was here, but then he was there, and then he was back again in his claws. He had a golden wedding dress. And the old mother devil creaked up the stairs and threw the dress in through the bathhouse window. Put that on, my dear. And as slowly as she could, the orphan girl slid it on. Are you wearing the dress? I am. Is it to your liking? It is. Well, then come on out and meet your groom. Oh, no, I can't, said the orphan girl. I need an embroidered girdle to go with the dress. And the grandmother devil said to her grandson, now quick as thought, go and fetch your bride an embroidered girdle. And he was here and he was there and he was back again in his claws, clutching an embroidered girdle. The old grandmother devil passed it through the bathhouse window, and slowly as she could, the orphan girl put on that girdle. Is it to your liking? Yes. Well, then come on out and meet your groom. Oh, but I have no fine shoes to attend a wedding. Very well. Quick as thought, go and fetch your bride some shoes. And he was here, he was there, he was back again in his claws, clutching a fine pair of silver shoes. The grandmother devil passed them through the window, and slowly as she could, that orphan girl put the silver shoes on, and didn't they look fine? But the mouse said to her, still you must delay. The dawn is a long time away. Come on out then, said the grandmother devil. I cannot. I'm not ready to meet my groom. I need a diamond tiara. Go and fetch your bride a diamond tiara. And quick as thought, the youngest grandson devil was here, and then he was there, and then he was back, clutching in his claws a diamond tiara. The old woman devil passed it through the window, and slowly as she could, the orphan girl put it on her head. Is it to your liking? It is. Then you must come out and meet your groom. And the mouse said to her, there's nothing to it. You can't delay any longer, but do not get into the coach. Find some fault with it. And the orphan girl nodded. She unbolted the door and stood there. She knew that the devils could not come in across the threshold, but once she stepped out, her soul would be in peril. She looked at the coach with the 6 black horses. You expect me to travel in that? What's wrong with it? This is the finest coach from under the earth. The devil himself went up the steps, put out his hand, and nervously she rested hers in his, and he escorted her down the stairs. He opened the door to the coach. She looked inside. I cannot go in there. I cannot. What's wrong with it? There's too many pillows. I can't travel in a coach full of pillows. What are you talking about? These are the softest pillows in the land, filled with goose feathers. Now, I have guests waiting. They are complaining that they can't start the wedding feast. You need to get in that coach now. We are already late to get started. You will marry my youngest son, and that is that. No, I will not get in until you replace those pillows. Replace them with what? Replace them with hay. I never travel anywhere without sitting in hay. At this, the devils all looked at each other. Hay? Hay? Hay. They were quite confused because, as you know, in hell, it is too hot to have hay lying around. It's all burned up. So they had brought no hay with them. They had no hay at all. And when they finally figured out what hay was, well, said the old grandmother, we don't have any hay, but we will soon get some. And one by one, she plucked out her own eyes, and she tossed them up into the air, where they circled around over the bathhouse, and then came back and went right back into her eye sockets. I can see just outside of town there's a large hay bale that has not been bound up yet. Grandson, quick as thought, go and fetch it for your bride. And he was here, and he was there. He wasn't back yet. And the other devils started to wonder what had happened to him. They were a little bit nervous. They started to complain. And then down the street, they saw an enormous hay bale being pushed, and underneath it, the youngest devil, blue in the face from carrying all that hay. He finally dropped it in front of the coach. And the orphan girl said, very well, get those pillows out of there. Fill the coach with hay. And the youngest devil and his 2 brothers started pulling out all those pillows and goose feathers and stuffing the coach full of hay until at last there was nothing more to be done. She was going to have to get into the coach. She looked into the sky. The morning star was there. The sky was still not quite light in the east. Get into the coach, said the devil. Why, a lady never gets in a coach first. I'm going to enter last. Well, the old woman devil hobbled into the coach, followed by her 3 grandsons, and then the devil himself, who then turned and reached out a hand. Come on up, my dear. You missed the spot of hay here on the ground. There's not enough hay in the coach. You are vexing me. The devil stepped out of the coach. He picked up that last piece of hay. He put it into the coach, and at that moment, the first cock crowed with the first burst of morning light in the east. All the crows, all the roosters in the town began to crow. And at this, the devils and the coach faded away. And there was the orphan girl, standing alone in front of the bathhouse, in a golden dress with an embroidered girdle, silver shoes, and a diamond tiara. And didn't she look fine? Well, she went home, and her mother, her foster mother, was so angry. The orphan girl had been away all night, but when she saw the riches she was decked in, she thought, ah, my own daughter shall do the same this very evening. And that night, she sent her own daughter to the bathhouse. And that night after the bath, once again the devil's coach arrived. And once again the mouse said, now delay as long as you can. Ah, but the apple does not fall far from the tree. And the daughter of the cruel woman ignored the mouse's advice and said, why should I not get all that I deserve right away? And she told the devil to bring me right now a golden dress, an embroidered girdle, silver shoes, and a diamond tiara. And quick as thought, that devil was here and there and back again. They put them through the window. She came out. She got into that coach. And she was never seen again.
Bravo, bravo. Spooky.
That's great.
Tim, that was fantastic. What a journey. Ah, loved it.
Never heard that one.
Never heard me neither, but it starts out a lot like ones we've heard, right? Like the path Cinderella did not take. Anyway, thank you, Tim. That was fantastic. And yes, Tim is put in the chat that he's going to be part of I think, a hybrid storytelling festival from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he'll be telling on December 16th. So check that out. All right. Woo. Our next storyteller is Renu Narayan, all the way from India. It's been so wonderful to have her with us when she can join us from the other side of the world through the miracle of Zoom. So right now I'm seeing.
Yeah, this is Claire. I'm not understanding what's happening. Renu, are you there?
Here she is.
Okay, you're on, Renu.
Okay, I didn't know I was the next. I'm sorry. I went away to get a witch's hat because I wasn't sure whether I should tell a Halloween story or should I. Do you want a folktale from India?
You can tell any kind of story you want. We love all your.
I have a witch hat. Okay, so I'm not going to tell this story. I think it's better if I tell you a folktale from India.
Lovely.
Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry I disappeared. A long time ago, Maharaj Krishna Deva Raya ruled over the vast empire of Vijayanagara. He was a very able king and very thoughtful. He took good care of his subjects and the kingdom prospered. His favorite person in the court was Tenali Raman. He was the court jester, but he was also extremely witty and had saved King Krishna Deva Raya from many an embarrassing situation, sometimes even a difficult one. And so the king relied on him a lot. One day, King Krishna Deva Raya was walking along the streets, dressed like a commoner. Sorry, could you hear me clearly? Okay. This was something he did on a regular basis. He wanted to really find out whether the people were really happy under his rule. And as he was walking along, he saw a huge crowd of people running towards him. He was puzzled. Why were they running? And where were they running? And so he took hold of one of the men and said, "Where are you running to? What's happening?" The man tried to break free and said, "Are you crazy? You want to stay here and ask me questions? Come on, come, run along with us." The king was puzzled, but he didn't run along with them. He waited. What was happening? He saw another group of people. "Wait, what's happening? Bad luck Ramaya is coming. Bad luck Ramaya is coming," they said, and they continued to run. He stood there for a minute, looking here and there, but there's no sign of anyone. So he went back to the palace and he announced in the assembly, "Who is Ramaya?" All the ministers looked at each other. And then one of them said, "Maharaj, you haven't heard of him? He brings bad luck. Anyone who sees his face first thing in the morning has a terrible day. Doesn't even get to eat a single meal." Now, King Krishnadevaraya did not believe in rumors unless they were proved to be right. And so he said, "I want Ramaya brought to the palace." It was late evening, and Ramaya had just come home after a long day on the fields. He was tired and sweaty, and therefore when a guard came and knocked on his door, he opened it. And the guard said, "The king has summoned you to the palace." Ramaya was both thrilled and surprised. Why would the king want him, an ordinary person like him, want him to come to the palace? But he did not wait to question. He quickly looked around, wore his cleanest clothes, and off he went to the palace. And when he reached, he bowed low and said, "Maharaj, you wanted to see me?" And King Krishnadevaraya looked at him and said, "So you are Ramaya. Everyone says you're bad luck. I must see for myself." "Maharaj, they are not right. I don't bring bad luck to anyone." "I must test that for myself," said the king. "You shall stay in the palace tonight in my antechamber." And so Ramaya was escorted to a small room next to the king's royal bedchamber. When Ramaya entered the room, he was surprised. He had never seen such a nice room, decorated so beautifully. And when he sat on that bed, it was so soft. He was so used to sleeping on a mat on the floor. Finally, he lay down. He was tired and sleepy. But no matter how much he turned and tossed, he just couldn't sleep. So he sat up. He looked around. Then he lay down again and fell fast asleep. About a couple of hours later, the king came to his bedchamber. He got into bed and he was just falling asleep and something woke him up. For a minute, he was surprised. What was that sound? Then he remembered, oh, Ramaya is sleeping there. So he went and looked inside, but there was no one on the bed. He looked all around, and behind the bed, on the floor, was Ramaya, dead to the world. The king went back to bed. But for a long time, he couldn't sleep because that sound kept disturbing him. Finally, in early hours of the morning, he fell asleep. And therefore, he woke up a little later than usual. He went to the antechamber, woke up Ramaya. Maharaj, Maharaj. Calm down, Ramaya. I wanted to see your face first thing in the morning. Come for breakfast. And the king left. Ramaya hurriedly got ready and went to the king's personal dining room. And there was the king sitting there, servers were coming in. A huge banana leaf was placed in front of each of them. Ramaya's eyes widened. Dish after dish was brought in. Fresh vadas and idlis, dosas, pongal. He had never seen so much food before in his life. And he didn't wait for anyone. He started eating and eating and eating. And the king watched him very amused. And just as the king was about to eat, zzz, a fly came and sat on his nose. Ah, the king said. Zzz, sat on his ear. Ah, zzz, on his head. Zzz, on his arm. Zzz, on his head. On his hand. Ah, said the king. And as he did this once again, the fly went and fell into his leaf. How could that king eat that food now? Take this leaf away, he shouted. But before the servers could come back and give him food, one of his ministers came running in. Maharaj, Maharaj, there's an emergency. Please come to the court immediately. And so the king left. He watched Ramaya. He was totally lost in eating. He went back to the court. He was busy the whole morning, the afternoon. He didn't have lunch, meeting after meeting. And finally, by the evening, he was exhausted. He was angry. He was shouting and screaming. And one of the ministers asked, Maharaj, what is the matter? I have not had a minute's rest. I have not eaten anything the whole day, the king shouted. Maharaj, did you see Ramaya's face first thing in the morning? Yes, I did. Ah, now you see. The king was surprised. Was it really true? And so he ordered his guards, bring Ramaya here. And when Ramaya was standing in front of the king, he said, it's true. You do bring bad luck and you shall be beheaded. Put him in the dungeons. And poor Ramaya, Maharaj, Maharaj, it's not true, please let me go. But he was dragged and put into the dungeons to be beheaded the next morning. Now, Ramaya's wife, Meenakshi, got the news and she rushed to the only person who could help her, Tenali Raman. Tenali Raman had not been present that day. He had been to visit his home. And that evening when he came back was when Meenakshi came running to him and said, Tenali, you're my only hope. You've got to save my husband. Tenali listened to the story and said, don't worry. You will see your husband back home tomorrow morning. The next morning, the king came to the palace. He went to court and he looked all around. And he said, where's Tenali? There, Maharaj, one of the ministers pointed. And somewhere far away from his usual place was Tenali. But his head was covered with a paper bag. The king was surprised. Tenali, what is the joke? Why are you wearing that paper hat, that paper bag? Your Majesty, please forgive me. But I'm scared to look at your face. Why? You see my face every day, don't you? But Maharaj, your face is bad luck. What? How dare you say that? Maharaj, you saw Ramaya's face last morning, didn't you? Yes, I did. So what? He brought me so much bad luck. I'm going to have him beheaded this morning. But Maharaj, whose face do you think is more bad luck? You saw Ramaya's face and your whole day you didn't eat. You had a very long day. But Ramaya saw your face and he's going to lose his life. The king realized what he had done was wrong. He smiled. Tenali removed his paper bag. I'm sorry, Tenali. I shall do things right. And so Ramaya was brought back from the dungeon. The king was ashamed of himself. He said, Ramaya, I'm very sorry. I invited you as my guest to the palace. And this is what I've done to you. I'm so sorry for the trauma that I have caused. Please take this bag of gold coins. Ramaya was so happy. Firstly, that he was not going to die, and he was receiving some gold, more than he could ever earn in the next few years. He looked at Tenali with gratitude in his eyes because he was sure that Tenali was behind this. And so that evening, that morning, Ramaya was back in his house, and Tenali had once again saved the king from a difficult situation. Thank you.
Ah. Oh, I'm sure we are all so glad that you told us that story. Some wonderful,
Thank you, Liz.
wonderful
Thank you.
wisdom
Actually,
in there.
Tenali Raman was a jester, and Krishna Devaraya did rule over the kingdom of Vijayanagara. This was many, many years ago.
So, Renu, is that a Tamil story? Because the Maharaj was eating idli and dosa.
Yes, it's an Indian story.
Yeah, but from the south.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
It's present day Karnataka, where Bangalore is.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, now we turn to our next storyteller is Lance McVeigh. And Lance actually was, I believe, last year our featured teller for our Halloween or our October swap. And he brings a really unique style of storytelling to our swap. So welcome, Lance.
Thank you. I was just trying to keep awake. Like the stories are so good and I'm so tired. All I wanted to do is like curl up in a bed and listen the rest of the night. Like, oh wait, I have to tell. So yeah, for those who don't know, I do tell my own stories written in verse. So we're going to drift away from the sort of classic fairy tale here. And I was trying to, most of my stories are really long. So I was trying to come up with something I could squeeze into 10 minutes. And I thought I'm going to do two short ones about two scary places, a basement and an attic, where all sorts of creepy things often happen. So I'm going to do one for a basement and one for an attic. I'll start with the basement. Oh, no, I'm going to start with the attic. We'll start on top. This is called Brian and the Boys' School. Some of you may have heard this if you've heard me before. Well, Brian was in boys' school, which Brian liked a lot. For though his age was youthful, his mentality was not. His parents, wise and wealthy, were of proper royal breed, and sent him off to boys' school to ensure that he'd succeed. He was nearly 9 years old, while the other boys were 12. When the other boys were naughty, their professors, he would tell. His ego was enormous, and spectacles he wore. He always did his homework, and mischief did abhor. His grades were always highest. He was an old professor's dream, but the other boys were jealous and angry, it would seem, for he became the object of their playful little puns and never could escape them, no matter where he'd run. They'd strip his bed of blankets, put flour in his sheets, and finally locked him in the attic to see if he would keep. Well, at first he screamed and hollered, but the professors never heard. The boys just laughed and chuckled to hear him so absurd. So he sat inside the darkness, and all he felt was fear, gave a wistful whimper and shed another tear. But slowly he considered that the solitude he sought. The boys had been a blessing in this bother they had brought, for now he was alone in a museum of the past, and sensed an opportunity to make the moment last. Well, nightfall finally came and curfew was at hand. The boys were all in bed, but they couldn't understand, for Brian had been silent. For hours, it seemed, they hadn't heard a holler, a whimper, or a scream. So they crept across the courtyard and up the dusty stairs and peered in through a peephole to see if he was there. Well, they saw a broken window that peered into the fog and heard the wind was howling through the branches in the bog. Well, each began to worry and wondered what to do and decided on a search in hopes to find a clue. Well, the attic was cold and cluttered with furniture and books, but bountiful with boxes and paintings hung on hooks. But Brian still was missing, and the boys were at a loss until they found a message beneath his holy cross. It said, "Dear Father, I am frightened. I'm terribly afraid. I sense an evil presence in this fortress they have made. In searching through the shadows, a sacred scroll I found. that said unto this attic, a spirit it did bound. My curiosity was careless, and I spoke some words aloud. The wind began to whistle, and I heard a haunting howl. Well, I'm standing at the window, and I gaze upon the moon. I can hear a demon breathing in the darkness of this room. This window is his exit, all guarded with my soul. I can smell the scent of brimstone. My terror takes its toll. So I write my last request and ask it to come true. If I must now be buried, let the boys be buried too. Well, the boys turned ghostly pale as they read the horrid verse, and they darted for the doorway, so dreadful was its curse. But the door flew closed before them, and they turned and tried to run. They clamored in confusion, but their fear had just begun. The demon is upon us! They screamed in fearful pain, and they heard a horrid cackle that sounded quite insane. Oh, demon of the darkness, they pleaded in their fear. We were really only joking to lock Brian up in here. Please let Brian be please let this be a nightmare, and we're really in our beds. Let Brian be our buddy, and he really isn't dead. And with that, the door was opened, and they fled the demon's den. They swore amongst themselves that they would never joke again. But as they passed the open doorway, they had failed in their fear to see behind the door was Brian, and he was smiling ear to ear, for he had made this moment to carry to his grave. His joke had been successful, and the boys would now behave. Once again, I am the smartest, much brighter than the rest. Now I will be the joker, the master of the jest. So he stood up from the darkness and felt something on the floor. He peered into the shadows and looked behind the door. There he found some parchment buried deep within a book. Curiosity overcame him, and he thought he'd have a look. Well, all was well when morning came. The boys were all behaved. The attic was forgotten and no reference to it made. But Brian still was missing when attendance had been called. His bed had not been slept in, and the professors were appalled. The school was searched for hours in every bush and tree. The dean was quite bewildered. Wherever could he be? Well, the boys brought up the attic and were quickly sent to look. But all that they had found was some parchment and a book. There was the slightest scent of sulfur, and they later found a shoe, and shortly found his spectacles that were cleanly broke in two. Days went by and weeks on end, but Brian ne'er was found. It was written and reported that he must have left the grounds. But the children, they know better, and they listen every night for the wailing winds of Brian as they echo through the night. The stories ne'er forgotten about the demon and his tomb, nor Brian and the boys' school that brought him to his doom.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Yay.
So that's the attic. So let's move into the basement. So this one's called A Pub Owned by Lady Petard. Two men in black hats went down to kill rats in a pub owned by Lady Petard. A few were soon dead, and together they said they were off to a pretty good start. But Petard had a cellar, and one went to tell her they'd be sorry if they couldn't procure permission to descend, and thus better to end her troubles with rats, they were sure. And so they were granted permission and planted their poison and traps down below. And they waited a day before they could say they were finished and thusly could go. So the next day they returned and were startled to learn not a vermin nor vomit was found. The traps were all tripped, the poison not sipped, but small prints were all over the ground. So the men in black hats improved on their traps and created a better device that would catch and not kill, without poison or pill, all the rats and quite likely the mice. So they put it in place and waited with grace for the bell that would signal the deed, had accomplished its task, so finally, at last, they could get paid as Petard had agreed. And so the bell rang, and with vigor they sprang to gaze at their needed success. But all that they found, lying there on the ground, was an image that was grim and grotesque. For there in a bag, and small ropes and a gag, in their contraption that was fully intact, were the tattered remains of Miss Kitty McLean, Lady Petart's long overdue cat. Well, with unwavering zeal, they made an appeal to Petart to allow them the chance to just flood the old cellar, and proceeded to tell her they'd like to get paid in advance. But she said, "You may not, and what's more, you have got to comply with the contract agreed. You shan't see a dime until such a time as the two of you fully succeed." So the law had been laid, and never dismayed, they threw themselves into the task. One loaded a gun, and the other had run to get a deadlier poison and masks. Armed to the teeth, they ventured beneath the pub to the cellar below, and they each said a prayer and felt a bit scared, not knowing quite how it would go. They descended the steps to the cellar and crept to the brick and the mortar below, where casks of fine brew and a lantern or two were cast in a flickering glow. They stood back to back when a thunderous crack rattled in the darkness and gloom. They adjusted their eyes and suddenly spied 1,000 some rats in the room. Well, above in the pub, the bar was the hub of an evening of joy and good cheer, for Lady Petard had mastered the art of serving guests wine and beer. No one understood the beer was so good that some of the clamor and cries that were so very loud were not from the crowd, but from men who now fought for their lives. Well, when things settled down and the people from town had tottered off back to their beds, Petard began clearing the glasses, not hearing a sound from the men before bed. And so then at dawn, Petard had been gone to shop for an evening affair. And when she returned, she was calm when she learned the men in black hats were not there. She descended the steps to the cellar and swept up the clutter she found on the floor. There was a dead rat or two, a gun and a shoe, and 2 hats that she found by the door. And after some time, she thought things were fine, for the cellar was tidy and clean. And she added 2 to her stack in her closet of hats, red, yellow, magenta, and green. 2 men in white hats went down to kill rats in a pub owned by Lady Petard. A few were soon dead, and together they said they were off to a pretty good start.
Oh my.
Creepy. Masterful.
Thank you.
Lance.
Thank you. Those both will appear in another book I'm working on called Lance McVeigh's Tales of Treachery and Terror, which my illustrator is working on right now. So I will let you all know whenever that happens.
Okay, Lance, and if you want to put like contact information so that people can get on your mailing list or something, please put it in the chat. Okay,
Will do.
we'll look forward to that. All right, moving along. Our next storyteller is Donna Michelson, and I'm waiting for Claire to spotlight Donna. And Donna, you can unmute yourself. All right.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Okay. Good evening. My husband, Tim Gordon, died on September the 20th. Some of you knew him a little bit from the swap at the Orinda Library, and some of you knew him in other ways. He had Parkinson's for the last 20 years of his life. And toward the end, his mobility became extremely compromised. And there's a kind of dementia that comes with Parkinson's, and Tim had it in a deepening way. And by the end, he could not speak, and there was only absence behind his eyes. 2 days after he died, my doorbell rang. Now, nowadays, usually that means there's a delivery. So I went out to the veranda to look down, and I didn't see a truck. And so I said, "Who's there?" And I looked down, and there was a young man standing there. And he looked up at me, and he said, "I'm here to visit Ranger Tim. Is he home?" And I said, "Oh no, you're here to visit Tim? I have to tell you, he died 2 days ago." Well, tears burst out of his eyes, and he said, "No, I really wanted to see him." And so I said, "Well, come on up." And he did. And he sat down on my love seat and introduced himself. His name was Kenel Paco Tackett. And for the next couple of hours, he sat there and poured out his story. Paco grew up in Berkeley, and he was a junior ranger. Now, junior rangers, so this was with Tim in the 80s and 90s. Junior Rangers is a program for kids from 9 to 13. But some of them stay on until they're as much as 18 and keep on being role models and aides for the younger kids, because it becomes a very strong circle. And you can think of Junior Rangers as Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts together, without any patriotism or any directed creed, just exploring the outdoors and having all kinds of adventures, from helping to build trails, boats that they can sail themselves, domes to climb on made out of eucalyptus saplings, removing invasive plants, and then taking increasingly more challenging overnight trips as the year progresses. Paco loved the JRs. He loved Tilden Park. He loved nature. He came to love nature, and most of all, he loved Tim. And he wanted somehow to carry the message that he felt he had gotten from Tim. So when Paco finished high school, he went to college in Wisconsin and and then he moved to Minneapolis and got a secure tech job, which paid the bills, but his passion was for introducing people to nature. So he spent several years as a docent at a park along the Mississippi River. And during this period, he met and married his wife, and they now have 5 kids. This is 2021. But after a while, just being a docent wasn't enough. It didn't fulfill what he really wanted. So he and his wife bought a 10-acre plot of pretty much trashed land, weedy, and not anything but natural, and anything but the original, what it originally meant to be natural in that place. And they are making what he calls a tree farm, although I think that's misleading, because what they're really doing on the land is that part of it they grow food on for themselves, and I don't know, maybe they sell some of it. But most of it, they are creating the native forest. They are bringing back the species that belong there and used to be there. And I don't know how many of you know this, but they've now discovered that trees can actually communicate with each other under the soil through mycorrhizae. And so there are certain kinds of species that feed one another. There's a better word that I can't think of right now. It starts with an S and I can't think of it. But anyway, that's what they're doing. And as a day or so later, he sent me a video, like a half-hour video of him just with great excitement, almost the kind of excitement that Tim used to have. Walking the viewer through their land. It turned out that the main reason that he was in Berkeley was to visit and try to help his mother, who is 79 years old, just my age, and lives less than a mile from me in a Section 8 subsidized apartment. And she's quite, well, essentially at this point, she's bedridden. But the doctor has said that if she had physical therapy and if she had really decent help, she could be mobile again. And his mission was to come here and help make that happen. So I told him about the absolutely best caregiver that I think could exist on the earth. And he said, well, he'd have to look into the insurance. And he told me that she was living strictly on Social Security. And I thought, well, I don't think there's going to be much of a chance of hiring Katja on that. So before he left, I actually, I gave him some money in the hopes that it would, and he's, by the way, he's an only child. So it's not like his siblings that live closer could pitch in. And I was so grateful to have a lot of help in the later time with Tim, both paid help and my daughter. And I never had to take care of someone from 3,000, 2,500 miles away. So I gave him a little bit of money to help. And I thought of that money as a kind of a bridge between Paco and Tim and myself. That's my story.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we all extend our sympathy and for the loss of such a very special person. And what an amazing new connection. I hope it continues.
Really, and I'm going to, I'll put it in the chat there for those of you who, I know there's already at least two people in the audience who are coming, but day after tomorrow in Tilden Park, in the afternoon, there's going to be a memorial celebration of Tim's life, also on Zoom. So I will put my email address in the chat. And if anyone is interested in attending or Zooming, and we're going to make it possible for disabled people, we've thought it all through, and we've got, anybody can come. Absolutely anybody can come, or they can Zoom. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. And I think we sent it out in the swap reminder at the beginning of the month, but just want to say also that if you go to berkeleyside.com or .org, the website of Berkeleyside newspaper, there's a beautiful tribute or story about Tim. So
sure, yeah. That
encourage everyone to read that. It will really, help you understand how he made that kind of impact that led to that story that Donna just shared. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
Okay. We're gonna take a little time for a few announcements here that if you, and during this announcement time, I'll put what I'm going to say into the chat as well. So if you need to get up and, do something for a minute, you could do that now. But I want to talk about Celebration in November. So November is coming and it's the month of Celebration. And in case you have not attended a Celebration before, it's a nationwide and it's become even international celebration of storytelling, especially storytelling for adults like we do here. Started in Connecticut, I don't know, 30 years ago, something like quite a while ago. And it was always the weekend before Thanksgiving. But so many people and groups have gotten in on the idea. It's caught on over these years so well that it's spread out over November. And in fact, here in California, SAC is supporting and celebrations every weekend of November up until Thanksgiving. And I am going to cut and paste them into the chat. And they, one of the really cool things, these are all on Zoom. So no matter where you live, you can attend any one or more that fit your schedule. And did that not work? No, it didn't. Have to try it again. Rats. What I wanted to say is that one of the really cool things that's happening this year is that quite a few of these swaps are joint, of these celebrations are joint celebrations between swap groups that are from different parts of the state, like north, south, coastal, mountains, coming together so that you get to hear storytellers from different areas and we get to hear each other. Now, our swap is not participating in a celebration this year. We are having our swap the Thursday before Thanksgiving. So that's a heads up. We usually have it, on the normal day we would have it is Thanksgiving. So for the last couple of years, we've been having our swap the Thursday before Thanksgiving. So keep your eye out for that. And after I introduce our next storyteller, I will put these celebrations, I'll get them into the chat. So,
Liz, I just put in the page, the SAC website that
Okay.
has them all listed too.
Great. Okay, so then I'll also,
Yeah,
I'll try and put them all in there so you can see their dates, but every weekend, between, not this coming weekend, not Halloween weekend, but starting the next one. So I hope everybody will attend. They're going to be great.
Sally, not Sally, Liz.
Yes.
I'm having a problem. I thought I knew how to do chat and I actually did one of them, but I've lost the ability to do it. Can someone put in my email, which is very easy? It's donna@lmi.net. clientotherinternet.net.
Okay, I'm doing it.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Are we ready to hear some more stories? I am. Our next storyteller is, how should I introduce you, Tyler?
Here's Tyler. That would work.
Tyler Pumpkin Phelps or
Oh, that's nice.
Tyler Snortum Phelps, who again is a longtime member of our swap. We haven't seen you in too much on Zoom, and we're so glad that you came. And please tell us a story.
Thank you, Liz. It is really a treat to be back with you guys. It has been too long, and it's always fun to come at this time of year because I've got my Chef Scrooge story. Some of you may have heard it, but this is from Christopher Kimball of Cook's Illustrated Magazine, Milk Street Show, America's Test Kitchen. And I like it because it has ghosts in it, so you can tell it at Halloween, and it has food in it, so you can tell it around Thanksgiving, and it has Scrooge in it, so you can tell it at Christmas. So, Chef Scrooge was a mean cook. I mean, he was the kind of cook who would thin the soup with dishwater if he could get away with it. I mean, he had absolutely no interest in spending even a penny on good taste or pleasure. In fact, it was said that he would be happiest making stone soup with nothing but stones in it, for then not a single penny would be spent on good taste. Because as far as Scrooge was concerned, a penny wasted on pleasure and fellowship and good taste was a penny spent on fellowship and good taste was a penny wasted. So Scrooge plied his trade at the Marleybone Hotel, where he had been serving poor cuisine for so many years. The rumors swirled around the kitchen at the Marleybone that the butter was thinned with candle grease, that the chocolate was adulterated with brick dust, that the bread was stretched with alum. But Scrooge's employers, the owners of the hotel, were only too happy to reap the profits of his miserly ways, like someone would pluck pennies from the eyes of the dead. And so it happened one Christmas Eve that Scrooge was presiding over a poor feast in his usual effort to extract the maximum profit from it, serving a thin, sour mock turtle soup. Was there a hint of horse meat in the soup? Those with sensitive palates wondered. Roast squab pie. Had some people noticed a lot fewer city pigeons around the vicinity of the Marleybone lately? And a great sack of boiled rice pudding, meager and thin, but still dessert of a sort. And for that pudding, Scrooge required sugar. And sugar was something he guarded with his life like a rat with a tasty morsel. He wouldn't even give the key to the larder to the chief butler of the Marleybone, Mr. Cratchit. No, Scrooge himself would go and get the tiny quantity of sugar that he begrudged this pudding. So down into the dank and dark dungeon he went, opening the heavy door, and there, to his amazement, sitting in the middle of the floor on a three-legged stool, appeared to be the image, the spitting image of Chef Marley. Chef Marley, who had been dead these 10 years. His mentor, his teacher, the man that had taught him the difference between pleasure and profit, how to thread the needle of the public's indifference to quality. He regarded him practically as a minor deity, a man who knew just how to sate the gross appetites of the rich while picking their pocket in the process. And there sat Marley, half there and half not there, his form glowing and wavering. "Scrooge," said Marley, "mark my words. You will be visited this night by 3 spirits. Heed their lessons well, lest you find yourself in the same fate as the man you see before you." And indeed, Marley was sagging, sallow, pale, sickly looking, wrapped all around his body with a huge heavy chain, hanging with the tools of his trade of a lifetime, knives and pots and pans and strainers and ladles. "Remember, Scrooge, this is your only chance," said Marley as he wavered a few more seconds and then, poof, vanished. The last things to blink out were his eyes, like 2 snuffed candles. Oh, Scrooge shook his head. Ridiculous! Regarded the whole thing as a daydream, as a vision, a fantasy, probably just brought on by indigestion, which no one was any stranger to around the Marleybone. And so he put himself to bed that night without giving it a second thought. And yet, shockingly, surprisingly, at the stroke of midnight, he heard his name. He was awakened. Scrooge, awake! Bolt upright, he sat up, looked to see this enormous figure wearing a green robe with a big wide belt and a crown of feathers and holly. I am the ghost of Christmas past, Christmas dinner past, Scrooge, said the ghost as he grabbed Scrooge's hand and pulled him out of bed. They flew, they seemed to go both through space and time, back and back through dark swirling currents until they landed in the dining room of Scrooge's childhood home. And there Christmas dinner was being served, and in an instant the smells brought Scrooge back to his childhood. Oh, the beautiful long table was laden with such delicious dishes, steaming aromas coming from them. Everyone smiling, the candles glowing, the room was warm, children scurrying around under the table. The rich brown crisp turkey was being served with delicious gravy, chestnut stuffing, and oh, the pastries and pies that were laid out on the side table. Scrooge remembered it all. Suddenly, the pleasure of a good meal, a meal shared in love and conviviality, came flooding back to him. And he was so excited he forgot that he wasn't really there. And he went to try to take his seat at the table, remembering such joys of Christmas dinner. And in that moment, the ghost grabbed his hand and pulled him back to his own cold, hard bed. Scrooge was asleep again, fitfully tossing and turning, when at 1 o'clock, as the clock struck, he was again awakened by a ghost who said, I am the ghost of Christmas present. Come, Ebenezer Scrooge, and pulled him again, this time just to the dining room of the Marleybone that very Christmas. And there, in the shabbily furnished room, dimly lit, Scrooge saw people sitting over meager dinners, couples not even conversing with each other, quickly eating the thin soup as fast as they could, gnawing on the sour joints of beef, trying to take care of their hunger with a minimum expenditure of time and money. But now the pleasures of the table had been rekindled in Scrooge. He understood the power of food cooked and served with love, and so this dismal scene weighed heavily on him as the ghost whisked him back to his bed. Now tossing and turning with strange visions and feverish dreams, Scrooge perhaps slept for another hour. He wasn't even sure, because then when the clock struck 2, he was awakened by the final ghost, a very strange figure, a young person, perhaps a few pimples on his face, wearing an odd, brightly colored polyester shirt and a little cap with a name tag that said Future. Come, Scrooge, he said, pulling Scrooge again through time and space to the site where the Marleybone used to be. And now in front there was a garishly colored storefront that said Marleybone Fish and Chips. And inside, under bright lights, people sat in orange plastic molded chairs, eating piles of greasy fish and chips wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. No, said Scrooge, no, cannot the future be changed? He screamed as the smell of old frying oil brought visions of Marley dragging his chains into a hopeless future. And then he was in his bed again, tossing, turning. Finally, through his barely opened eyes, he realized that dawn was breaking. He had made it, or had he, to the next morning. But what day was it? Was he here? What was happening? Did he die in his sleep? Did he dream the whole thing? Was it just one more long night of indigestion? Scrooge ran to the window and threw it open. You boy, what day is it? Well, don't you know, sir? It's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day, said Scrooge with great glee. His redemption had occurred, and he said to that boy, run to the poulterers and buy me the 3 fattest geese you can and deliver them to the Marleybone Hotel lickety-split. There's 2 extra bob for you if you're fast. Well, those lucky few who had Christmas dinner at the Marleybone Hotel that night still talk about it to this day. Their eyes get a little glassy. They become wistful as they remember that exquisite meal. The goose cooked to perfection, the skin so crisp it crackled. Everything savory and steaming and rich. Oh, and the desserts and the puddings and the pies, so rich and yet so light. Each bite just carried you back to childhood almost, like a mother's kiss or a bedtime story. And so it was said that Scrooge really learned that to cook for others with love is the greatest joy of all, that the greatest profit comes from good fellowship, from a well-prepared meal. And so Scrooge would stand at the end of the long feast table, everyone dressed in their finest, smiling up at him, his arm around Mr. Cratchit. He would drain the last of the punch from his glass, light the Christmas pudding, and say to the assembled company, God bless us, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler, for blessing us with that story. And I think some of us are feeling mighty hungry right now. Some of us who kind of missed our
That's the idea, yes.
All right. Our next storyteller is Vicki Ness. And where are you? There she is. And this is one of the tellers who didn't join us when we were in person because she's up in Sonoma County, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're so glad that you've been joining us on Zoom. Please tell us a story.
Okay. I don't normally tell scary stories, and so I don't normally create scary stories. So this is sort of new for me, but it's Halloween, so I'm going for it. The most beautiful house at 71 Maple Street. That was it. The whole neighborhood knew it was beautiful. Inside, heirlooms and antiques glimmered with shimmering polished brass and deeply resonant antique woods. And the oriental carpet shone like stained glass windows. And above, beautiful crystal chandeliers, tiny little crystals, sent a million rainbows all around the room. And this was possible because there was a woman who took very good care of her acquisitions and her house. And she dusted, and she cleaned, and she polished, and she wiped, and she shook, and she worked, and she worked, and she worked until she got kind of bitter about it all. But she kept doing it, but she was bitter. But she kept doing it because she needed to, but she was bitter. Well, the more bitter she got, the less she cleaned and wiped and dusted. And then she picked up her big silver tray, a gorgeous antique, and she polished it. And she always loved to see her reflection in it. And this time, what was looking back at her wasn't actually her reflection. It was a shape, and it was diffuse, and it was moving ever farther away, almost as though it was sinking into a fog. And this upset her greatly. So she put the tray down and she went and got her exquisitely carved vase and put it in the middle that was overflowing with the most beautiful flowers. And that was just perfect. And then she went to vacuum, but the rug had whooped up, caught her foot, and sent her flying. Landing on the floor, facing up, she could feel the furnishings looking down at her with maybe contempt, maybe a little derision. And straight above her was a chandelier, which was looking a little smudgy. So she went and got her stool and she stood on it with her polishing cloth and polished and polished and polished every little tiny crystal till there was one in the very back that kept calling out, me, me, me. So she leaned way over, closer, closer, and she got it all polished, but then she fell over. Well, exhausted and bruised, she got up and replaced the stool and threw herself down on the sofa. And her enormous plush velvet throw pillows comforted her in a sort of suffocating embrace, and their fat fringe lay on her like cold, lifeless fingers. And she began to become just a little nervous. But then all of a sudden, the sofa seat cushions opened up and revealed a black gaping maw, and she fell into the darkness farther and farther and farther, past old ballpoint pens, past stale cookie crumbs and the occasional hairpin, farther back in the darkness. And then the seat cushions closed up like a giant jaw, and the air current rose up, causing a beautiful arabesque of dust. And the crystals in the little chandelier tittered among themselves maliciously. And the house grew silent. And silent it was for weeks. Dead flies gathered on the grimy windowsills. Spiders kept up their work, weaving grimy, gray, ghostly cotton candy webs in the corners. Occasionally, the shh of a paper-thin leaf falling from a plant that had been strangled by or no water at all. And the house grew sepulchral. Dampness rose up from under the house. The walls exuded a kind of claustrophobia. And so it sat in a limbo of death. But outside, people were doing what people normally do. They were finishing projects and they were going shopping and they were doing all kinds of things until somebody finally said, "Oh, you know what? I haven't seen the woman over there in a long time. Have you seen a woman in that house? I haven't seen her." The other one would say, "Oh, you know, I used to see her on Tuesdays at the market, but now that you mention it, I haven't seen her." And so a large, friendly mob of neighbors ambled up the front walkway and got up to the door and banged on the door, and they punched on the bell and they looked in the window and they, "Hello, hello, hello." The sepulchral silence ate their words and spewed nothing out. So they called the police. And the police came up the front steps and they banged on the door and they punched on the little bell there, and they looked in the window and they went, "Hello, hello, hello." Stone cold silence. So they broke down the door and they went in and they found no sign of violence, no sign of struggle. In fact, the house looked like it was perfectly cared for, except for maybe the stench of rotten dead flowers in a vase and, you know, a thick smothering carpet of dust on everything. But what could they do? So they tossed the lady's name into the list of people who were missing and proceeded to go on that path. The house fell through the court system, through the estate, through the probate, through the hands of underpaid law clerks and aggravated secretaries, until it eventually landed in the hands of an inquisitive, energetic, and very happy distant relative, a boy. And he showed up and he cleaned out and he cleaned up and he repapered and he repainted. And then he called his friend, the realtor, and said, "Come on over." So she did. And she drove a stake into the front lawn with a big sign that said, "For sale." Then she set about staging it. But she didn't use heirloom because heirloom is old. Nobody wants old. They want new. They want hip. They want mid-century modern. So in came the sleek and shiny sofas and chairs, glimmering in orbit orange and cosmic blue vinyl. And in the middle, a plate glass table, just barely floating above black stiletto legs, with candy-colored designer magazines sprayed out. And the whole effect was that of a smarmy and cruel gigolo or a high-class prostitute becking, come in, sit down, tell me your dreams, make yourself comfortable. And so people did. And the house, not a sound. With icy predator patience, it stared and waited for the next living soul to move in. And sure enough, they did. Happy Halloween.
Wow, Vicki, I think you've discovered a new direction for your really amazing imagination and creative storytelling. So, all right, Sally, turn it over to you to take us out. And don't forget to unmute yourself. Right now you're muted.
Let's see. Okay. Yes, what a joy. What wonderful, wonderful stories from friends from long ago and new friends. It's just such every month is such a wonderful experience. Just a lovely, lovely time. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for Zooming. And thank you all for every teller, each and every one of you. So I'll take you out with a little Sally story. Wishing you a happy Halloween. And don't forget to come back on November the 18th, third Thursday of the month. Okay, third Thursday next month. So here's a little Halloween story for you. The little girl, thick braids, big brown eyes, stood in front of her mother. She was dressed like a gypsy. She wore a taffeta skirt. Well, it was really a slip that belonged to her mother, and it was pinned with safety pins to keep it up. And she wore a white satin blouse that had also belonged to her mother's, and the sleeves were so long that they took ribbons and tied them up so that her hands would be available for the work that she had to do, picking up treats, you know. And her mother looked at her and she said, "Now what you need is some jewelry." And so mother went over to the jewelry case and she brought out great big hoop earrings and attached them to the little lobes of the child, and it fell right off. But the mother was very clever. And she took string and tied it onto the hoops of the earrings and then hung the earrings on the little girl's ears. And then she took her over to the jewelry box and pulled out the gold chains from Woolworths and glass beads. And now she looked at her and said, "You know what a gypsy needs? A gypsy needs just a little bit of lipstick and a little bit of rouge. There you are, sweetie. Now you're ready for Halloween." Now remember, when somebody gives you a treat, you say thank you. And you only take one treat and you stay with the other boys and girls. And so the gypsy ran out of the house and down to the road where the other children were meeting. And there was a clown and a fairy and a ghost. And there was Donald, her best friend, also 8 years old. And he was dressed as a pirate with a patch on his eye and a sword by his side. And the children went down the street knocking on doors, and the parents would come and ooh and ah at them and offer treats. And then at last they were at the big house at the end of the road, a big Southern colonial house. And the sun had already gone below the horizon. So it was just not totally dark, but almost. And the great big magnolia trees on the lawn sort of hovered over the little group of children. And the gypsy was afraid, and she cuddled up to the pirate, who took her by the hand, and they walked to the door of the big house, and they rang the bell, and the door opened. Oh, and who was there but a big, big witch with a terrible green nose. Come on in, children. I'd like to have you come in. Come, come. We're going to celebrate Halloween. And the little gypsy was so afraid, she took hold of the arm of the pirate. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's only Mrs. McCarthy. You know that. Well, maybe it was only Mrs. McCarthy, but this was Halloween. It could be a real witch. And then coming from the upper part of the house, there was this moaning sound. Ooh, ooh, and pretty soon there was a ghost coming down the stairs, a big ghost, a big fat ghost. And it went down one stair and then another stair. And the little gypsy got clinging to the pirate all this time. And then the ghost took off his head, well, the covering on his head. And of course, it was Dr. McCarthy. Hello, children. Happy Halloween to you. Come on in the kitchen. And in the kitchen on the linoleum floor was a great big tin bowl of apples to do apple dip, you know, to bite the apples, apple picking. And each child lined up and was put their heads down and take an apple in their teeth. But the little gypsy didn't want to do it. I mean, maybe the apple was poisoned. Did you ever think of that? It could be poison. This was Halloween, you know. So the pirate, he stood up and he took his sword and he stabbed an apple and he handed it to the gypsy. Oh, thank you, Donald. Thank you, Donald. And now all the children were at the table. The children on two benches, the witch at one end and the ghost at the other. And each child had a cup of chocolate cocoa with marshmallows floating in it, of course, and cookies the shape of pumpkins. And they ate their pumpkin cookies and they drank their cocoa. And when they were all done, they each got a special treat to put in their bag. And the pirate said, come on, we have to go home. And everybody marched to their house, the pirate delivering the little gypsy to her house. And when she got home, she did as they always did. She took the treats and she made 3 piles, one to keep at home, one to take to school, and one to give to the orphans. She didn't know any orphans, but her mother always said, we will make a pile for the orphans. And so she always did. And then they could hear the sound of the older kids coming down the street. And Halloween was almost over. And the gypsy looked at herself one more time in the mirror with her wonderful dangling earrings and her little red mouth. And then she took her clothes and put it back into the dress-up bag, knowing that there would be another Halloween. And maybe she would see another witch and another ghost. And so the night came and she went to sleep. And that's how it was some 70 years ago when I was a child and celebrating Halloween. And I hope that you and your children and your grandchildren will have wonderful Halloween too. Thank you all. See you next month. Godspeed. Bye-bye.
Yay. Thank you, Sally. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lovely stories tonight.
Okay, so I think Claire is going to stop our recording. And I just,
Can we have a moment to look at the chat here?
yeah. Oh, well, we should save the chat. And